Great. Welcome to the JCR Pod. My name is James Carter. I'm the founder of JCR Talent, specialist regulatory compliance recruitment, and I'm here with Zak today. So thank you for joining us, Zak. The reason why I decided to launch a podcast, I know there's plenty of podcasts out there that I'm sure people listen to, and may well have rolled their eyes when they saw that I was launching one as well. But there isn't much out there in the way of regulatory compliance. And about 15 months ago, I started a newsletter on LinkedIn and released monthly articles. And over that space of time, got quite good traction, and seems like people are interested in hearing about other people's opinions in the market based on CASS and compliance and ESG and all of the topics that you kind of look at on a day-to-day basis. So I thought, well, why not take that to the next level and actually bring it into a bit more of an engaging format, hence the podcast. So be available on our YouTube, and also I'm looking at loading onto Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well, for those of you who like to listen on the way into work or at lunch. So yeah, let's get started. Zak, for those of you who haven't spoken to Zak before, is a CASS specialist. We met, I think I was thinking earlier, how long ago was it? It was probably about 9 years ago now, Zak, maybe 8 or 9 years ago.
It was about 8-9 years ago, yeah.
And I remember I met you when you were working with a client over in Essex.
Yes.
And I don't know if I told you this, but I actually got lost a few times on the way to meeting you, because I had a look on Google Maps and worked out my journey. Being based up in Manchester, I often have to do that whenever I go to London, and it looked like a pretty simple journey. Off the train, a short walk, and there we'd be. And anyway, I ended up in a housing estate, and getting in all sorts of bother. But I got there eventually. It doesn't seem 8 or 9 years ago, I must say. But obviously we've kept in touch over the years, and really pleased to have you as the first guest.
Yeah, look, thanks for having me, James. And I think I've definitely got a few more grey hairs since then. And
as have I.
I do fondly recall that moment when we did first meet, because I think we weren't very privileged with the number of options we had to grab a coffee. I think we were quite restricted. We grabbed a coffee. I think you were there with a colleague. And yeah, like you said, it's flown by. What, 8, 9, almost 10 years has flown by, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously in that time, you've worked with a number of different clients, and obviously, set up your own business, which is great. I certainly have found it really useful when we've partnered on content. Most recently, talking about CASS 15 and safeguarding, which is obviously a very hot topic in the CASS world. I'd be keen to start off just talking a little bit about that. And I know I've had quite a few messages over the last couple of weeks from people in the CASS space who are very, very eager to hear your thoughts on this. Just if we start off, Zak, just regarding why the rules have been brought in and who it actually affects.
Yeah, absolutely. So, James, you're obviously aware that the CASS regime's been around for a long time, and that's gone through a few evolutions, and it's really matured into a strong regulation from the FCA's perspective. On this contrary, the safeguarding, there were a number of weaknesses that were found when the FCA performed reviews. I think they found an increase in the number of firms that had safeguarding issues. And so they felt like the framework hadn't perhaps evolved with the development in the safeguarding space, so the payment services and electronic money space. And I'm sure everyone's aware that that space has massively changed over the last sort of 10 years, right? And the number of firms operating in that space, the amount of money that goes through payment services firms and institutions has completely transformed over the last 10 years. And naturally, the FCA have come to a view that they need to strengthen that, and what better than to leverage something that currently exists. So the CASS regime, it was the natural place to look at when it came to finding a regulation that was more suitable and more appropriate for the risks associated with the safeguarding space, the payment money space, and the electronic money space. So the CASS regime has now been very much is going to be sort of adapted and adopted in the payment services world going forward, and that's what the sort of the big change is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, it does remind me of when I started off recruiting, which was coming up to 9 years ago, and it was just as the FRC assurance standard came in, and it was one of those really where most of the industry were looking at where they needed to strengthen, and sort of structural changes internally, looking at what framework was already in place and kind of leveling up from there, really. Would you say that it's kind of similar in that respect from a payments perspective?
It's a good parallel, James. In all honesty, the FRC came in, and that was the sort of the assurance standard that the FRC put together back in 17. I think it was originally the first version, at least. That came in, and that required a lot of work from CASS regulated firms. And similarly, this regulation, whilst it's not through the FRC, as you're aware, it's through the FCA. It's going to have that level of impact for the firms that are impacted. So the firms that this will apply to are authorized payment institutions, it'd be e-money institutions, small e-money institutions and large ones as well, and credit unions that issue e-money within the UK under the payment services and electronic money regulations. So for those firms, certainly it's going to be a huge change, and they'll have to look into how they change their processes, their framework, their governance, pretty much that end-to-end process that they've currently got, and make it more suitable for what is going to be a more demanding regulation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what do you foresee being the main challenges for those who are having to obviously implement a new way of working and essentially a new function in between line 1 and 2? What do you think will be the main sort of headaches that people will have to overcome?
It's a good question, James. I think as humans, we are creatures of habit. We don't like change, do we? As much as change is a constant, and we can't move away from change, and it's a necessity almost. There will be big changes, and naturally, with those big changes, trying to understand where this sort of this safeguarding team, the almost CASS style team, where they sit, sort of first line in between first and second. So from a reporting function perspective, there would be some changes. Culturally, I think when you have a more demanding regulation, when you have the auditors looking into your space within the payment services firms with a sort of deeper lens, a broader lens, the regulator is going to be a lot more interested in what's going on within the firm as well, and they will get certain reporting on the back of this, monthly reporting that they'll get, almost like a CMA style monthly reporting that they'll be getting. So with that change, you're going to see senior management suddenly will have to be more interested, if they weren't already more interested in this space, and trying to understand it at board level, at the various committees that senior management sit on. And so that top-down approach, that top-down culture will have to really come across and go through the firm, and those changes at the granular level, from a process all the way to the top, in terms of the culture and the way this risk is perceived and treated.
Yeah, I guess one of the big things will be creating the resolution pack, because we've not seen many of the sort of CASS RP spot checks in recent years, but I know a few years ago they were more common. Do you think that could potentially be more of those on the horizon? Do you think the regulator will look at doing some RP spot checks maybe some point next year, to ensure that they're as comprehensive as they should be?
The RP is actually a good indicator. It's almost like a good barometer in terms of what's the culture like, how seriously has a firm taken on this regulation. And the nature of the RP is that it doesn't require, it's not very intense or heavy or very technical in terms of doing a sort of simulation test or just doing a quick, review on the RP. So it's a useful way of a regulator or anyone for that matter to just understand how that regulation has been embedded, and just to get a good flavor of that. So it could be a technique that the regulator uses, absolutely, potentially. And like I said, because it's not as resource intense in terms of the review that's required on the back of it, it will be an effective and efficient way of assessing how firms have adapted and adopted to the change.
Okay. And from an audit perspective, I know, that's obviously going to be, that first audit is going to be really, pivotal to the businesses that have had to make those changes, and it probably will be a bit of a shock, really. First of all, from a cost perspective, we know how expensive the CASS audit can be. But what do you think the auditors are most likely to focus on in that first year?
The audit will be a big shock, absolutely. I think the level of scrutiny from once there were requirements under the PSR regulations and the FCA's approach document certainly wasn't as stringent, and the changes to the rules will make that audit a lot more demanding. And one of the key areas will be reconciliations. Absolutely. I think reconciliations is always key for every firm. How much money you have that you should have versus how much money you actually have. And going from a sort of more relaxed environment to a daily reconciliation will be very demanding. And on the back of the reconciliation, all the processes on either side of the reconciliations will then come under a lot of scrutiny as well, because again, those will need to be ramped up, and the controls will need to be ramped up around both sides of the reconciliations and the controls to make sure that the reconciliations can stand up to the rigor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then just CAS as a whole, really, what do you think, from an audit perspective, is going to be the main areas that auditors focus on? From speaking with some of my network, it's going to be likely be IT controls. That's been the main one over the last couple of years. Obviously, you've got third party oversight, which has always been very much a focus. But is there anything else that you think the auditors will likely focus on this year?
I think certainly IT. IT continues to be a big area. Again, naturally, as the world evolves around IT and firms are really uplifting their IT infrastructure and reliance on IT, and naturally the dependence on IT is increasing. So IT will continue to be a very important area. I think another area that has been an important area for the FCA and has remained a top priority for the FCA is culture. Mm-hmm. And the CASS culture and the sort of governance and culture aspects of it, and that is, whilst it's not a sort of isolated way of looking at culture, or there isn't an isolated way of looking at governance, it's sort of holistic and across the firm. Certainly, auditors will continue to look at that and assess that and evaluate that and see whether there is the appropriate and adequate culture that's required in such firms, whether it be on the back of the new regulation or existing firms. I think culture and governance remains to be, along with IT, the two sort of key areas to the auditors will continue focusing on.
Mm-hmm. I guess from a culture perspective, it's one of those that's company wide, really, isn't it? And I guess that's the challenge when you work directly in the CASS team. Looking at CASS on a day-to-day basis, it's probably, from a CASS oversight perspective, it's probably a little bit easier to measure and sort of manage. Whereas the culture piece, that's from operations through to, compliance to audit, finance, that has to be measured throughout. And I guess that is a challenge for a lot of businesses. Is that something that you found, Zach?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, James. The culture piece takes a long time as well, right? It's not something that, like you said, it's not within your immediate control. You can change the sort of culture within your team, your organization, in terms of the areas that you're in charge of. But certainly, culture is much broader than that. And so those changes can take years, right? Sometimes it's organic, sometimes it's a trigger because new senior management have come in, there's a new CEO, there's a new COO, or someone of that, new CRO, or someone of that high sort of C-suite level has come in and really wants to change what they've seen. And so, the culture piece can take 2-3 years, sometimes even longer. But you need to have that vision, and you need to work with that vision and get the buy-in from the senior stakeholders. And through that, once you have the buy-in, then implementing it and trying to sort of see the benefits of it,
Definitely.
which takes a bit of time, yeah.
Do you think that might be a challenge, that senior stakeholder buy-in, with just going back to payments? Because and I've heard it being a frustration in a lot of businesses whereby the CASS oversight officer doesn't necessarily feel like they're getting the tools that they need to ensure, that CASS where is where it should be. Do you think that might be a challenge for some of the payments firms when obviously, from a cost perspective and a resource perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think cost perspective, resource perspective, trying to get buy-in from the senior managers, trying to make them realize, because look, not everyone's going to be aware of all the changes and the regulations in the way as intimately as perhaps a practitioner in the space is, right? And so trying to take that message and then portray it back to the board, and then you have another part of the business that's taken another regulation, another change, and then trying to again portray it back to the board. It's an evolving space, the whole the regulatory space, right? And the landscape is changing, in terms of regulations are going up generally. So it's trying to get the focus and the attention whilst all the changes are happening, and making sure that they are then giving the right level of attention amongst all the other changes, to sort of not just the regulatory space, even within the business, right? The changes happening in the business as priorities, from a strategic perspective, from an operational perspective. Again, even getting the buy-in can be a bit of a difficult and a bit of a long game, right? And so you do need to have patience, have the conviction, and sort of hope and pray that that strategy works. And then once you've got that buy-in part, you should be able to then implement that strategy more seamlessly.
Yeah. And just going back to culture for a moment, do you have any sort of tasks or exercises that CASS leaders can undertake to measure the culture across the business?
There are ways of doing it. Certainly, one quick way is sitting and observing committees. So whether that be board, or whether that be one of the committees that reports into the board, so it could be the risk committee, or perhaps when you first start off, and it might just be the CAS committee, seeing whether the board members are aware of CAS. Are they asking the right types of questions? Are they linking CAS to the various changes and the various updates within the business? And from there, you can get a sense of, is there enough knowledge across the board, across the senior management? And are they able to link CAS to the various topics? Are they asking the right questions? Are they inquiring, even if they don't know, are they inquiring and trying to make the link to get the answer? I mean, that's sufficient. There's no expectation that board members must know everything about CAS and know all the linkages. But I think just observing a couple of these committees, board level, and certainly some of the committees reporting to the board, is probably a good way of just trying to assess how the CAS culture is. Another good way is probably at that's the top level, and then at the more operational level, looking at your policies and procedures. Are they quite mature? Has there been quite a lot of thought put into it? Have there been quite a lot of eyes that have sort of read and reviewed these policies and procedures? Do they seem to cover off the various bases? And a combination of that will give you an indicator of operationally is there maturity, and from a governance and broader culture perspective, is there maturity from a CAS perspective.
Okay. Oh, that's great. That was one of the questions actually that was
Oh yeah.
sent in. The other question, one of the other questions that was sent in as well was, what challenges do you foresee for someone moving from a pure CAS role into a safeguarding role? So I would imagine there will be people who make the move over from maybe investments over to payments into that CAS safeguarding role.
Yeah, there will be, and there will be, SMFs that will need to start taking on those roles and senior management roles within these payment service firms. And certainly, an obvious challenge would be if you are in a relatively mature environment from a CAS perspective, and then you're now moving into a payment services firm who has been under if I may say, not as stringent of a regulatory framework as the CAS regulation, then naturally that culture piece and maturity piece will come in, and perhaps there'll be some frustrations and challenges when it comes to getting your points across, getting your messages across in terms of getting the firm up to the level that it needs to get up to. And those relationships will almost be starting, even if it's not from zero, certainly a relatively low level, because say the safeguarding regulations, whilst they are relatively still strong regulations, and the framework, the CAS regulations are a few notches up, and that shift in mindset and approach within the firm, it will take a bit of time for that person to potentially adapt to that, unless they happen to go into a very mature organization that's fully ready for it. But as we know, there are so many moving parts within a business. There are so many strategically, operationally, never mind all the external regulatory changes, that it's very difficult to be on top of everything at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that there's an opportunity to make things a little bit easier with the investment of tech? Because obviously there's a number of different sort of, whether it be from a reconciliations perspective or whether it's regulatory technology to support with regulatory compliance. Is that something that a lot of payments firms should consider implementing it earlier, rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, tech definitely helps. Naturally, it will help, at least, has the potential to save you time and potentially save you some of the thinking. But certainly at the start, the investment has to be understanding those changes and the processes and what that means to the business. And once you've understood it, then you can look at perhaps how technology can be a sort of a catalyst to make that process easier, or
Yeah.
perhaps a catalyst to save you some time when it comes to it. But I think if you move to that tech stage too quickly without understanding the changes in the processes and what that means to your business, there's a risk of disconnect, and that expedited process could result in adapting and adopting these technologies. But actually, when it comes to the audits, they then find that actually you're not really meeting the requirements. And then that could be very costly afterwards if you're then having to change something significantly, or you realize that the provider that you've gone with, if it is an external provider, then they don't simply just match up to the expectations from a regulatory perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess like you make a good point about introducing it at the right time, because the data has to be there, in order to ensure that the tech is, it's utilized in the right way. So maybe that's something that once the framework's in place and it's, that it's where it should be, that then's potentially the right time to introduce tech. Okay, and then just with regards to, I guess, sort of, um, any other challenges that you foresee this year, whether that be, in other sectors from a cash perspective. One of the things that I'm finding is that I think there'll be a challenge with actually candidate attraction, I think, because, it's can be seen as quite daunting moving into a firm where everything is, needs to be built from the ground up.
Yeah.
I think that will be a potential challenge is bringing people in who are happy to do that, and I think they will definitely want assurances that they will get the tools and the investment that's needed. But yeah, I think that will probably be the main challenge for payments firms that are going to be recruiting for client asset oversight officers. Do you see any other potential challenges throughout this year?
The personnel side, absolutely. You definitely need the right people who understand the regulation, understand the business as well, to be able to make sure that the business and regulation marry up within your within your business and the frameworks that are built up. And some of the broader topics that we've discussed, culture will remain sort of big sort of topic and challenge. But I think certainly resourcing side, because again, the payment services firms, the EMI firms, the CASS regulation being so much more stringent, there's a level of expertise and level of expertise that's expected from the regulator for these firms to have. And so for payment services firms, they need to be able to quickly adapt to that and say, okay, well, we need to bring in the right level of expertise. That we can't really have a relatively junior person taking on these SMF roles or these senior management roles, right?
Yeah.
We need to get the right profile, and getting the right profile from an existing pool that's the CASS pool of SMEs. It's not huge. I mean, it's not small. It certainly has grown, but nonetheless, trying to bring them over to the payment services side will be a challenge for these firms potentially.
Definitely. Yeah, and just finally, Zak, it'd be great just to talk through the recent changes that you've had actually this week with the business. So a complete rebrand, which is very exciting. So if you just want to talk us through a little bit about what the changes are there, and how that can be offered to potential clients in the CASS world.
Yeah, thanks, James. The rebrand was trying to keep up with the sort of changing world and trying to make the brand a little bit more relevant. When I started the company, I just used my surname, Zak Karim Consultancy, and I felt like I need to now make a sort of differentiation between me, the personal brand, and the company brand. And so I felt like that was a good time to do it, where I make that differentiation. The company brand has its own brand equity. I have my own profile, and that's fine. But keeping that sort of distinct, but positively distinct. And through that, we've also looking to increase our offerings as well. So CASS and safeguarding, of course, remains to be one of our key spaces. But we're also moving into the regulatory authorization space and financial crime and risk management as well. These are areas that continue to be, we've seen high demand areas, and areas that we can certainly help and support businesses with.
Great. Yeah, well, I must say the rebrand looks great. I think I mentioned when I first launched, I kind of tried the branding piece myself, and it didn't last very long. It looked pretty awful. I'll send you a photo of what my first logo looked like. Quick shout out to Brad, who we've both worked with, who's done a great job with both of our branding and website and so on. If you're looking for any support in the regulatory space, then Zak, drop him a note, and I'm sure he'll be able to help. Appreciate your time, Zak. That's half an hour, which has flown by. So appreciate you setting aside your Friday afternoon. Very much appreciated. So thank you for those that have listened. It really is appreciated. Any feedback would be great. This is obviously the first of hopefully many. Plan to do one every month. Actually, Zak, do you have a particular topic that you think we should maybe look at in the next one? And I'll try and source an expert to speak to about it.
Just broadly, in any regulation, James, or CASS, or
any regulation, anything
yeah.
you think.
I think financial crime would be a good topic. I think that hits quite a lot, broad number of firms as well, and the impact of financial crime continues to be very prevalent. So perhaps financial crime.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'll get to work on that. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Nice one. Thanks, James. Pleasure to be invited, and speak to you soon.
Cheers, Zach. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.